Na začátek bych rád ještě znovu představil naše dnešní hosty, kterými je pan ředitel odboru pro nerovnosti ve vzdělávání Jan Vöröš Mušuta. A poté je tady z Irska naše hostka z Ministerstva pro vzdělávání a výzkum paní Grainne Cullen, z Estonska paní Maarja Keskpaik, z Británie Paul Fountain a ze Švédska je tady Martin Rockberg. Ti budou všichni zodpovídat na naše dotazy a poté i na vaše. A to mě přivádí k tomu, že pokud byste měli nějaké dotazy, máme tam samozřejmě přemístěny i ty z dopoledne, takže na ty taky přijde řada, ale pokud byste měli ještě nějaké doplňující, které byste se chtěli zeptat, které vzniknou v průběhu té diskuze, můžete je sdílet právě skrz tento QR kód a QR kódy máte i na stolech před sebou na papírech skrze Slido. My je vybereme a poté na ně bude dáván zřetel. Takže můžeme začít. Let's start with the panel discussion. Let me hand my iPad over to Jan Mušuta. And we have decided to focus on 5 different topics that we would like to discuss with you. The first one will be targeting support, and the goal would be to compare and contrast different approaches to the support. The second one that we're interested in is funding and decision making, where we want to compare levels of autonomy and support for schools, in your experience. And the third one will be equity and segregation, where we want to open a sensitive discussion on equity and school choice. The fourth one will be identifying needs and measuring impact, with the goal of showcase practical approaches and evaluation methods. And we'll finish with something more positive, and we would like you to tell us the future directions and maybe even recommendations for us. The somewhat of a co-host will be Jan Mušuta, because he's the one responsible for the policy making decisions, and he will be probably asking some more questions than just the ones that are written here. So maybe, Jan, can you share with us the first question I will ask you, and then I would like you all to answer. So the first question is, what is the scope of the support, and what is the proportion of the education budget allocated to schools with social disadvantages?
So, thank you for the questions. I will firstly briefly introduce our situation in Czech Republic for our host and colleagues from other countries. We are in the special moment because we used to run a 3-year project for supporting disadvantaged schools. About 10% of schools were participating, and we were supporting them from the money from the European Union. And now we are in the point that we are trying to continue this support from the state budget, from the state measure, make it a part of the financing of schools and support of schools for the future. So we are dealing with the questions as how much money we should allocate, what we should try to achieve, and so on. So this is exactly the question we are dealing with now, the scope of the support. And nowadays the scope was like few percent of the school budget. It was significant enough that it motivates schools, but it probably won't be high enough to make radical changes. For example, and for context, and the situation is the same or similar as in Estonia, we have special schools and special classrooms, and they are funded differently, and approximately 3.5 times more funding per pupil in a special classroom. But what we try to do is to support all schools or support education in mainstream schools. So there is a big difference between the mainstream school funding and special classroom funding, which leads to like overuse of special classrooms because of this additional support. And we try to bridge this gap. So we are thinking in measures like, should we allocate twice the money as usual? Should we allocate, it's 10% enough? So I would be curious if, in your perspective, what is the threshold when it begins to matter for schools? And what is not enough that we cannot expect any change? And I know that you have different approaches per pupil or per school. And yeah, it can help us to decide what roads to take. Thank you.
So Maarja, maybe you could start. Yeah, you can grab the mic and please.
It's working? Yes. So thank you for the question. As I say, it's in my presentation as well. Estonia has a mixed approach. We have like a state level responsibility and a local level responsibility. But every mainstream school has to right to open special classes, which one is enhanced support, which means there are 12 students in the class, and this is meant for the students who have learning difficulties. And second one is for the special support, meant for the mental difficulties. And in our case, we have seen that the head money funding formula for those students is twice or 4 times bigger. So this is our formula for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So maybe Grainne, could you follow up? So what is the scope of the support and the proportion of education budget allocated to schools?
So mine will be a much more general answer because of the way our system works. It's almost impossible, even when I said 180 million per year on the DEYS schools, it's very much the approximation because it's around the posts that we allocate. So we don't have this middle layer in Ireland. We literally have the Department of Education and then the schools. So we don't have that local authority layer. We don't have, and the funding then is done, as I mentioned earlier, your capitation, which is the norm, and then you have a percentage. And I don't have the figure for the percentage, but that's increased depending on the weighting for the different groups that would be socially disadvantaged. And then within the DEYS program itself, there's a whole range of different initiatives that are funded separately. So, for instance, the school completion program that I mentioned, that team per school would submit their retention plan annually, and based on that, then the funding comes based on the plan for that particular project. And there's 122 projects going across about 800 schools with that project. And that's 37 million goes into that particular support. The HSELs, then they come out of the school teaching supply budget. So again, we don't separate them out. So it's actually very difficult to answer it in any kind of a simple way. But our full education budget is close to 9 billion, and 180 million is what we currently say we spend in terms of, yeah, exactly. And then there's very separate funding for the special education piece, special education classes and special education schools. So a really long way to say we can't break it down in a very simple way.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Martin, could you follow up?
Well, it's hard to give a figure because we have, first of all, like Estonia, we have a very decentralized system. So we support both from the state and from the local authorities. And some of the support are general and some of the support are directed. So for example, we have a state general support for all rural areas in Sweden get extra money by and large, not only for schools, but the local authority get extra money for having a rural lab. There's also state-functioned general development programs that are for free, you can take part of. And so that's the general. A more directed is the Cooperation for Better Schools that I talked about this morning is an example of directed towards targeted. Another one is you can apply for extra salary subsidiaries to the most troubled schools, so you can increase salary for the teachers there. So that's on the state level. There are more, but some of it. And on the local level, one of the things local authorities do in general, they work a lot with quality work, trying to do that, trying to support schools and teachers and their professional development networks locally, especially targeting troubled schools. And locally we also have directed initiatives, like we provide a different amount of money for students dependent on their geography, special needs, social economical status, and so on. And there is also a local version of this Cooperation for Better Schools. So there's a mixed variety of general and directed on the state level and the local authority level. And I haven't got the foggiest what it means when it comes to overall budget.
Okay, thank you. So, Jan, would you like to react?
Several of you mentioned that you have the centralized system and the local governments play a role. Similarly, in Czech Republic, local governments participate on funding of schools. They receive money directly from taxations, but they can decide how they use the money. Do you have some measure how to ensure that there's equity in the funding? Because a local government, especially one which in disadvantaged region, has other needs, for example, law enforcement or other areas. So there is a big stress on their budgets. And how do you ensure in these decentralized systems that all pupils have equal access to education and in all areas the funding is similar or comparable? Do you have the answer for that? Because I need one.
That must be a question for England. Or was it for me?
Whoever deals with this issue, I think in Estonia it's for sure.
Okay, maybe I should. In Sweden we have this system of school inspectors, so that's one way, and they don't. Part of it is they are in the classroom, but the majority is they are looking on how money is spent, how the organization is carried out, how they take the quality assurance responsibility, and so on. So they make full reports from meeting with kids and so on. So therefore you will have an ongoing evaluation, both on sort of the everyday operation and in times of specific initiatives. Secondly, we have a specific national agency targeting special needs. We have very few people at the ministry. We have strong national agencies, and we have one general agency for education, and we have another one for special needs. And they do this all the time, trying to make sure that people needing special needs will also get it.
So maybe I continue. In Estonia as well, the money which goes for the students who are needs, I don't know if the term is right in English. It's like earmarked. It's like targeted money from the budget. You can only use it, for example, for the support specialists' salaries, teacher salaries, or school lunches, etc. It's not allowed to change it in the budget. So this is one measure. And Estonia also, of course, you can always do audits and control and do everything. But we also, we try to have a positive angle on it. At the same time as we forbid or try to change something, we also try to enforce the quality as well. At the same time, when we do this in this autonomy, we also trying to improve the quality of the educational leadership. So then you can also try to make sure that the money goes to the place where it's the most needed. It's like a control with also some quality, high-ending or something. So, thanks.
Paul, could you maybe react?
Yes. As I said earlier, in England, a lot of funding is per pupil funding. So we have the general per pupil funding, but then there's additional money for children with special educational needs, disadvantaged, I said earlier, but also children who have English as an additional language trigger additional funding as well, because there's related costs to developing their level of English. In terms of the monitoring, we have our friendly inspectors as well, which we love. We love when they arrive. We also have a local layer of monitoring. So schools have a governing body, which is made up of local volunteers, and their job is to monitor that what the school says it's doing and planning to achieve, it is doing and planning to achieve. I'm very lucky because my wife is one of the governors. So I get checked at work and at home.
Okay, thank you. And I'll probably, or do you want to add, Grainne?
Yeah, maybe just to mention, yeah. So we would run at the department level, we obviously have the national audit in terms of Controller and Auditor General and our Department of Expenditure and Reform. And obviously our Secretary General then is responsible for ensuring that what we said we were going to spend was spent on what we were going to do. And then, like the UK example, you have voluntary board of management at the school level. But in recent years, we've introduced a level, a financial shared services unit within the department, which now has more access to the data from the schools, because one of the things we have to get better at is data and using that data and trying to analyse exactly what the schools are spending that money on. And I think in times of recession, it's really starting to show, where people are being creative in terms of the use of those funds, as I'm sure I'm seeing some nodding in the audience there. If you need heat and light and, so there are questions around that and around the controls that we have in relation to it. On another side, while I said we don't have a middle layer, in one area we have education training boards, which are just becoming more of a regional kind of governance body for currently just their own they're called ETBs, so for their own schools. And they have that governance role in terms of what was the spending on and how. And then with our agencies, we would have memorandums of understanding, SLAs, service level agreements, and reporting. So there are cycles, even though we don't have that kind of devolved layer, there are cycles of the governance, it moves right from, as I say, the deeper end to the department, ETBs, and then the schools. So it is a matter of trying to figure out how to get that data. One of the things we suffer from is the systems in the schools, so the IT systems in the schools are all different. So they use different platforms. I'm sure you're probably somewhat the same. So it's very difficult then to gather in the information. If you did want to do a deep dive, in which they do, this financial shared services unit would audit and deep dive into particular schools and look at their funding. But it's it's getting that data in, and we're getting better at it. But yeah, we've a way to go on it. So if you were setting up from the start, it would be, good to have those building blocks in your IT system, in your payroll system, in your, all the different systems talking to each other.
Thank you. Jan, do you want to follow up with something or not?
I'm a little bit disappointed because I wanted to have we need 10 billion crowns, and that's the benchmark from other countries. I get it that it's very difficult to express it in numbers, but the problem we have is that it is a large sum of money because education is very expensive, and if you want to make an impact, you cannot make an impact with 1% or 2% of money. You need some 10%, and then there are billions of euros or crowns. So it's a challenge for communicating this topic to public, that we want to allocate this money for this purpose. So it remains a challenge for us. We will be rolling out the system of so-called index funding. We will try to differentiate funding of schools based on the percentage of disadvantaged pupils in said schools. And we will roll out gradually. We will start with the wages of teachers. We will differentiate, so the principal of the school has more money for wages. Next year, I hope we will try to do something similar to England to make some people premium, something money direct to pupils. And we will see how the political parties or new government in Czech Republic had general elections 4 weeks ago. So what the new government, what will the priorities be? But we have now in the law possibility, or we have the measure how to enact these index funding measures. So we are now funding and trying to find the solution of how much money allocate. And thank you for your input.
Thank you. I'll follow up with the next question, and maybe, Grainne, if I could address it to you, because you have a long-term support incorporated in your system. So I would like to ask you who was involved in designing the support system. Was it only the ministries, or was it non-government organizations or researchers, or all of them? So if you could answer that. That would be nice.
All of the above. What I might give you an example of is this new scheme that Maeve mentioned in her presentation. So we're looking at this, what we call DEYS Plus. So what we decided to do was do a customer design-centered approach, which was quite new for the department. And involved really intense work with small groups of stakeholders. So we do huge national consultations, a lot of research, the OECD, the ESRI, all of those bodies, we've been working with them over the last number of years. If you remember the timeline I did there's 2 or 3 different review points. That was just for the DEYS programme itself. That's also true of each of the, like the HSEL scheme, the school completion programme, the various different projects that we've done over the years. So it's the research piece, it's the gathering the evidence, and the data is really, really core. But with the DEYS Plus piece then, it was very much a designed piece with the people working with these circumstances on the ground, and making sure that we used a methodology that actually captured those voices really well. So what that led to was from all the consultations we had done and from all the research, we built these personas, I suppose, of the children. And then worked through with that group over a number of months the type of, it's the kind of innovation kind of methodologies that people are all very used to, but it's around really identifying the issues and then bringing them down and down until you can get into the core, and then looking at, well, then what are the options? And the first option is the one where you go, forget all the restraints. If you could do anything, what would be the things you do? And then you filter them down and filter them down and filter them down until you get down to 3 or 4 big core pieces that these people who deal with this stuff every day on the ground, like yourselves, are identifying really what's going to make a difference from the system. So, yeah, I mean, I think the DEYS Plus scheme, while it has come through, it's coming through now, and we'll publish it before the end of the year. I would say there's a good 3 years' work done around that in terms of consultation and research, and then building into a kind of a peak of the design piece. And then, of course, we're at the costing.
So, yeah, if you want to add something.
Just a quick note, just for amusement maybe, because I was talking about the 3-year program, piloting program we just finished in Czech Republic, and this is European money for... and it was recovery fund after the COVID. And so we were under very short timelines and pressure. So you were speaking about 3 years, and we had like 3 weeks to design the support. And I think quite managed to do it. But we are now catching up with these consultations and so on. Like we had to make decisions then, and we reversed the order. So just a note.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry, we should move on to the other fields because I know there's a lot to say on all of your behalves, but I would like to move to funding and decision making because it's something that we should definitely cover. And I would like to start with Paul, maybe. If you could tell us how much autonomy do schools have in using the support they receive? I know that in your school it may be different than the average public schools, but if you know the answer, that would be nice.
It is variable depending on the source of the funding. So there's legal frameworks around how the money for special educational needs must be spent. Whereas, as you saw this morning, the pupil premium funding is more based on the outcomes that you achieve, and schools are very free to look at their cohorts and their contexts and prove the appropriate approaches that will get the best outcomes for their children. So there's more guidance there than legal framework. So it's a definite mixture, but at the end of the day, all schools in England are judged on the outcomes that their pupils achieve. So even where you have autonomy, you always have to have that eye on achievement of pupils, and that's got to be your driving force with every penny you spend.
Okay, thank you. Maybe, Jan, would you like to add our Czech context?
Yeah, this is also a very important topic for us because in the piloting program I mentioned, we gave schools options. They had like 30 different types of activities they could use the money for, very ranging from the school lunches, free school lunches, and pedagogical support, teachers' assistants, tutoring, extra tutoring for pupils. And we used this opportunity to look what was effective. And what we are like dealing with now is how we should put pressure on schools to use it most effectively, or how we think it's most effectively, because we see that sometimes the schools are not knowledgeable enough, or they don't have experiences with these issues. So we see some inefficiencies in using of money. So I would be glad to hear from Sweden and Ireland, because I know you have like comprehensive programs for supporting schools. So what's your solution? Where do you find the balance?
So maybe Martin, if you could answer.
Well, I will try. We have a decentralized system. That means that due to that fact, there is a lot of governing structure, or the governing documents, rules and regulations for everybody, so that we should behave locally the way we ought to behave. And then we have just a few people at the ministry, but we have the National Agency of Inspection, the National Agency of Education, and the National Agency of Special Needs. And they provide a mixture of what you call stick and carrot. They provide telling, apart from the governing documents, they're telling these local authorities what to do, but they also provide money if they walk sort of voluntarily. You can apply for money doing things in that direction. So it's voluntary, but still sort of recommended, so to speak. So it's a mixture from completely voluntary to mandatory, apart from the governing documents.
Okay, and maybe Grainne, could you follow up?
Yeah, I think the way I describe it in terms of the DEYS program, so it's built around a number of themes. I think you mentioned themes earlier as well. So I think we have 7 themes. And then there's guidance around each of those themes. And each school then takes that guidance and uses its resources as it sees fit, and it targets to the children that they feel are most in need. And that then follows through to reports and checking and auditing of those kind of reports back in. So the one piece, I suppose, that there's most flexibility with is the grant. So there's a grant that's given to each school. And so that, and as I say, that has what we call a circular, which is like our semi-legal framework in terms of the using that money. And that's reported back in, and the inspectorate follow up. And that's when I mentioned the extra support for those schools around planning. It's how do you make sure that the activities you're doing in the school are actually going to reach the outcomes for that particular theme. So that's all within the inspectorate would guide that as well. But the school would have quite a lot of autonomy in that. But then, say the HSCL that I talked about, there's very little autonomy in terms of that, in that you're allocated a number of posts. And those posts are very defined, and the job that those people do is very closely defined. And then with the school completion programme piece, that big chunk, as I said to you, that's based on an annual plan and an annual budget and back in. So there's autonomy to do it within those kind of guiding pieces. How do we know it's effective and which things work? I think that's, and if we could work that one out, we'd be really, really, really happy with ourselves. The interplay between all of these different DEYS supports and then the universal support. So our universal supports of free school books, free school meals, like they all play into the context. So it's really difficult to extract, because we will hear that children will come to school the day that there's, or they'll come because there's a meal, or it's at the breakfast club, or, there's something being run in the school on attendance, as the examples earlier on as well. So it's difficult to extract exactly what is making that difference. But we track things then like attendance and attainment and retention. But as Maeve was saying earlier, we're working with our Social Research Institute, the ESRI, to try and look at what other things we can start to track in order to try and look at, can we make that causality link? There must be more that we can actually do. And there's a whole range of different pilot projects and things, particularly in the well-being area. Now, really, really tricky on well-being indicators and things like that. But we have a number of projects with a number of the universities where, again, the research is being done in the background as well to try and make those links and figure out. One of the things, and I meant to mention it earlier, is there's a drive at home around reducing the rate of child poverty. And that's been driven centrally from the Taoiseach's office, so our Prime Minister. And so there's a much more of a whole of government kind of piece coming in around all of these supports. So that piece where I was saying the department is kind of moving across areas that might be traditionally health and things like that, that's going to make it even more complex to actually try and measure. Because if it's, which of those measures might be actually the thing that's making the difference. And for instance, with school meals, that's not funded through the Department of Education, it's funded through the Department of Social Protection. So again, no easy answer.
Yeah. Maybe I have a follow-up question for Paul. I think you mentioned in your presentation the teaching and learning toolkit from Educational Endowment, which is very useful. We know about the tool and we use it. But my question would be, does the schools use it? Do you use it in your daily work? And is it reasonable to expect that everyone in school will be educated in this topic? Or is it better to concentrate on some key people, key core team who are experts and they, provide some guidance to schools?
Again, I think that's not a necessarily simple answer. It depends on what you're trying to achieve and the circumstances of that. So as regards the EFF toolkit, that's really so clear and so easy to use that any school that is looking to develop an aspect, because it's not just the page that I showed you, there are toolkits on supporting children with special educational needs. There are toolkits on attendance and so forth. So any school that has a development programme that wanted to look and see, is there something here that could support me? You know, it's all the top research in one place, so you're not having to search around and try and find what might work. So as regards using that toolkit, I think in any circumstance, any school could use it. In terms of bringing about change, what we found, certainly when I worked for the local authority, is where we were trying to change approaches, in my case in mathematics, working with a percentage of schools to prove the project was a very effective way. So we had children at the age of 7 at the bottom of the country for achievement in mathematics. So we ran a programme for a year with a group of 10 schools. There were the 10 schools in Peterborough with the lowest outcomes in mathematics at age 7, logically. We worked with those schools over the whole year. They got to work together. They got to talk about what worked well in their schools, what their challenges were. And at the end of that year, the average uptake was, it's a long time ago, but it was 9-point-something%. I can't remember the decimal. Once we had that proof of project, we were then able to roll that out as an approach to other schools. And they could see the benefit of investing because they could see the outcomes that those schools had achieved. So certainly in terms of bringing about change with a new approach, I think a smaller group of schools that prove, because equally it might not have worked. And then we don't want to roll it out to all schools.
Thank you. Do you want to add something?
Maybe I will add the Czech context. It's similar, I think, with most of you, but in Czech Republic especially, we have a lot of small schools. Like 25% of schools is 50 pupils or less. We have over 6,000 municipalities, very small municipalities. Most of them are less than 1,000 inhabitants. And half of them are establishing a school, independent school. So it's a big challenge to reach everyone, to educate everyone, because at the local government there is no expertise, because there's no expertise in anything, because it's a village of 100 people. And we tried to bridge the gap between the center knowledge, and I think we did build a team with this project we finished, and we published some results. Tomáš Machalík was showing the publication in his welcoming speech. But now we face the challenge how to implement it, how to best use the best of it for the most of the schools. So that's like a segue for another question, which is how do you approach the methodological support of teaching staff, teachers or principals? Do you have special programs for them? Do you have some comprehensive, approach you can show them and be part? I know DEYS and your Sweden program is something like that, and we are trying to build something similar. So if you can describe in more detail how you work with the individual from the school within the program. Thank you.
So maybe Maarja, could you tell us from the Estonian perspective?
Did I understand correctly that's how we provide the toolkit for the teachers, mainly? So in Estonia, we try to collect as much data as possible. So because this can be useful for schools as well. For example, from the state level, every year we do a students' well-being surveys, like for 8th graders, 4th graders, and every second year then there's going to be parents, teachers, etc. as well, and every school can filter out their results, and this is going to be some kind of like a measurement they can follow to put together their development programs. So because we know there's in Estonia we have almost 500 comprehensive schools, but the school leading level is very different. We have really high-level schools and really like a leading-wise, I mean. And we know, like doing development programs, when we have a headmasters who have been headmasters for 20 years, they say, we do it because we have always done it. And they say like, what? You know, this is like great data, you know, and this we can also help schools to start with a correct measurements. So this we do with the state level, but how we teachers training money comes from the state budget, and this is also this earmarked budget line. This can be only used for the budget, and as I said as well that when we renew curriculum on the state level, teachers are always included as an external experts. That's how we also get the expertise. What are the toolkits or the tools the teachers actually need? And how we do it as a state, we provide guidelines, but it's the school's autonomous decision how they deal with the trainings. But we have a really a close cooperation with universities, because in Estonia also when I went to the uni, I'm not that old, so it wasn't that long time ago. So I don't sleep in the freezer, so to keep myself fresh, it's just, you know, it's the Nordic stuff. We keep fresh for a longer time. But nobody talked about inclusive education. Nobody. But now it's a new thing. We do different stuff, cooperation with universities. What we started, we use a lot of European social fund finances, and we started with cooperation with the universities that teachers who are already teaching can go through micro-credential programs, for example. And we try to offer this really flexible learning path for teachers. And also unis do a lot of hardcore training on the matters of inclusive education on the school fields as well. So we have actually, there are many approaches, but there's something we try to influence from the state level, but in Estonia there is that final decision always stays in school. Yep.
Thank you. Paul, you wanted to add from your point of view?
Yeah, there's a few approaches that we take in England. So there can be school-led decisions. So there's teachers that are seen as specialists in particular areas. So I'm qualified as a special leader in education for mathematics. So any school can contact my principal and ask for me to go to support them on an area of their choosing. So that's very much school-led. There's also, at the other end of the spectrum, where schools are brought together for centralised training, but very targeted. So I'll stick with maths because that's the area I know best. So with maths, you'd bring the leader for maths within the school together. So then they would then be responsible for sharing that message amongst their staff. If we had a situation where we had very small schools who might not be able to release, a combination, sometimes we would look to have a subject leader from a nearby school support them directly. When I worked at the local authority, we also had a team of 4 consultants, including myself, with 53 schools, so a little over 11 each. That was quite a that was quite a positive model, because the 12 schools that I actually supported, the head teacher knew me, they trusted me. And again, it wasn't me coming in and saying, you must do this, this, this. It was the school's development plan, but then I was helping them get there that little bit quicker than if they didn't have that additional support. So that's several different approaches. Within England at the moment, a lot of schools work together in groups. So whether that's local authority schools, which they'll call themselves a cluster, but also some schools have opted out of local government control, and those are called trusts, academy trusts. So in the academy trust that I work for, there are 2 secondary schools and there are 5 primary schools. So the 5 primary schools, again, can support each other on, we've got this issue, you've got that as a strength, So each school breaks down where they feel their strengths are on a shared document, where they could support other schools, and other schools, if they filled out that's an area we would like support on, you've got a perfect match. It doesn't always work out, but it's quite an effective way of schools that know each other being able to say, we'd love help from you because you're saying that you're able to support in that area that we've identified as something we want to work on.
I have a follow-up question that has risen kind of, how many hours a week do you have to teach as a teacher? Because in here at a lower secondary level, it's 22 hours a week for a teacher that he or she needs to teach directly. So how many hours is it with you? Because you mentioned that you, if some other school contacts your principal, you can be sent to other schools. So maybe how does that work practically?
Working in school leadership, I don't have a direct cost if I'm sent to another school. Obviously, I'm not present within the school, but I don't have a direct cost. Okay. So although I do teach, when I'm released to do that role, it would be at agreed time when there would be no cost to the school. There is local government funding which we can apply to cover those costs. But I find I get used more when I say I won't cost you anything. So.
Okay, thank you. We should move probably to another field of questions, which is equity and segregation. And I would like to start with the first one and ask Grainne. So how do you ensure that support doesn't lead to the concentration of disadvantaged students in specific schools?
That is the big question. That is the question. Yeah, it really is. So it's really difficult to figure this one out, because if you put the supports where they're needed, then people who need those supports will come to that school. Particularly, you might remember I mentioned our Admissions Act, which is that there's parental choice. So if I have a child that might be struggling, I will likely send them to my local DEYS school because there's lots of other supports there. But then you start to get more and more of a concentration of the children who need that support. So that's why in one way we're starting to look at disadvantage in all schools and how can we actually spread without diluting too much the impact of what we're doing, but spread our finite resources to ensure that we're providing other schools with the same type of supports that are working. The other thing, and we talked about actually over lunch, you'd also get, because of the housing policy, particularly because of our IPAS centres, so we're getting, you know, this pushing people into particular areas, and then you will find those who can afford to move out from an area will drive their children out to a school, and so it will become more local, and we will, I think you mentioned 43 different languages in the school. We would be the same in terms of the primary schools. So I remember going into one relatively recently and looking at, they had a map on the wall with all the pins from across the world as to where their children came from, and it was really very, very striking. And so that map that Maeve put up of the changing demographic in Ireland is really pushing that. How do we ensure I don't think we can. I think all we can do is provide the supports to those schools who really have that very high-end need.
Thank you. You want to follow up?
I'm interested in answers from all of you, but I will add the Czech context, because we know that this is the big question, and there is a lot of concern that the more we support the disadvantaged schools, more disadvantaged they will be, because there will be this effect of trying to attract more disadvantaged pupils. And we have several proposals how to deal with that. And one of them is inspired by England, by the direct pupil premium, because then the money follows the pupil, wherever he is. And if you combine it with some ceiling, it means that we pay you for 10% of pupils, not more. Then you lose the incentive to have more than 10% of disadvantaged pupils because you cannot reach for more money. And the other schools next to you, on the other hand, has incentive to bring in these pupils because they have extra money for them. And in Czech Republic, we have formal system of catchment areas that you legally are entitled to be enlisted in your school, nearest school of your home. But in practice, you can choose whatever school you want. And if there is a place, they have more or less obligation to accept you. So in fact, parents are choosing the schools, or schools are choosing the children, if you think about it, because they can have some criteria if the children are outside of their catchment area. So in passing years, it tends to the situation when you have like very good schools and the other schools. This is the point I was talking about in the morning. And we think that you can combine this pupil premium, it's one way, but then you have a support you cannot attach to a student or pupil, like, for example, personal support, or teacher assistant, or something like that. And then we think that we can use the information about economical status of the family from the social services, of the pupils of said school. For example, 20% of pupils are entitled to some social benefit, and then compare it with the catchment area. And for example, your catchment area, only 10% of pupils are entitled, but in your school, 20%. So we will pay you for 10%, and you are incentivized to, distribute the rest of the pupils to the next school. Because in Czech Republic, there are these informal pressures to, push this more, I don't want to say difficult, but more challenging students to other schools informally. And we cannot solve it legally because it's not legal, it's informal process, but we can incentivize financially. So is it something you use or you perceive in your systems, or how does it work in your countries?
Martin, if you could start maybe.
Well, there's a different way of you distribute resources where you need them the most. And I don't think there's a perfect system doing this, but the problem of trying to, even though you get more money, trying to informally get rid of bad students is something really happening, and we're struggling in Sweden how to meet up with that. And it tends to be in the areas where there is a good socioeconomic situation. They try to so it tries to make it even more strong, so to speak. And there's different solutions being discussed this is a really hot topic. How do you go about doing this? Because we don't want all the strong children there and all the less strong children there. We want to have a mixture that's best for most people. So that's really so we're looking forward for your solution here.
Then you can export it. Why not?
Paul, you want to continue?
Echo what Martin said, I don't think there's any magic wand with this. In Peterborough, we have a railway track running up the middle of the city, and regardless what the schools are like, there is a perception if you're on the west-hand side of the railway track, you're in a better school than the east side. I'm on the east side, so that annoys me a bit. There has to be, in my view, parents have to have freedom of choice, but then the onus is on us to make our schools as attractive as possible, because children are happy in our schools, children are achieving in our schools, and if that is seen, the pools are going to be less. So I think it's about increasing the pool towards your own school. But I do agree, per pupil funding, I would widen it in the UK. I think it's a very narrow measure of disadvantage in the UK, but I do think per pupil funding that follows pupils is the right approach.
Just one thing that has been mentioned a couple of times is around how a school is judged to have achieved. And in Ireland, we have a piece in our legislation around not producing league tables. So we don't provide, as a state, the results by school. Now, other organisations do when it gets into the media, and you'll talk about feeder schools for different universities and all of that sort of stuff. But we do not link our funding to the education outcome. And that might be something to just think about, because when you get that move, you know, of the kind of, that's the good convent school over there, they'll, you know, you get that attraction, and then you do start to segregate more. So one of the things we are strong on, and have been for a long time, is the state will not produce the results from the schools.
I will have a follow-up question for Maarja, because we have, I think, a similar experience from our country, because we are Eastern European countries, and and I see in Czech Republic that we have some catching up in terms of thinking about inclusion and equal access to education in the minds of teachers and principals and even administrators. And I think that in the last 5 or 10 years, we reached the point that we think that this is desirable, that equal access to education is really the goal. And we didn't used to have this consensus 10 years ago, because we were very good pupils should go to good schools, and bad pupils, that's their fault that they are so bad. So we evolved, I think, and it is a good thing. But the change is top-down, I would say, that we see in some research that most of teachers are not optimistic about the opportunities of or possibility of change and educational outcomes or academic optimism, or how you call it. So do you struggle with that too? And what are the tools how to promote these values?
Yes, as I told you earlier, yes is my answer. I went to the university 15 years ago. Nobody even talked about inclusive education. In Estonia, of course, we have lots of prejudice against inclusive education as well. But maybe in somehow I'm very different than my colleagues, that Estonian society has been very homogeneous. So when we deal with inclusive education, we deal basically with only one cultural background. And Russian students as well, but Russian is also it goes to the history as well. So this is maybe one thing. It is changing now. It's also can create some tension. But in Estonia, I think that many schools now start to realize that how we consider inclusive education is also the way how we implemented it. So because, as I told, from the educational law, we get the framework, and schools are actually very free to implement it in the way which suits them the best. And from the law, in every Estonian school, there has to be 4 support specialists. And believe me, social pedagogues, this is the best thing, one of the best things you can do for your schools. We also need to have speech therapists, psychologists, etc. So, and the social pedagogue, in the context of inclusive education, is the best bridge you can build between schools and local governments, for example. And of course, I think the game changer is also to work with teachers and to also work with the mindset. So, because maybe this is also something comes from the Soviet era, that, being different, this was no. So we need to hide all those students. And in Estonia also it has been problematic to change the point of view, because in Estonia, every second teacher is 50 plus. So this is a bigger problem that we also teacher workforce is really critical for us. And you know that at some age can be more difficult to change the mindset. But we get the framework and we get the autonomy and more money, more support specialists. And the last thing, what is now under discussion in Estonia as well, we unfortunately don't have a strong teaching assistant support. And now this is on my work table, so to say, how to also bring teachers' assistants to the Estonian schools. We have them, but on a really like unequal level.
Thank you. And now I would like to move to another set of questions, and we should focus on identifying needs and measuring impact. And I would like to start with a question for Jan. So if you could give us a Czech context, because the question is, what indicators do you use to assess whether support is effective?
Yeah. I was talking about the time pressure we were under 3 years ago. So we really struggled with this area because we didn't have time to really properly think about and discuss with professionals from different areas. The goal, we took the goal as granted because we received the money for the purpose of supporting these schools. So it was the other way around, that we didn't have to define the need, and we get the money and then we define the need. But now when we are trying to implement this into the Czech law and legal framework for financing schools, we are thinking really hard, what is the purpose? What is the measurable impact we want to have? And what is the impact we can have in 1-2 years, and what is the impact in 10-15 years? And we came to several candidates. First one is absenteeism, or it seems to us that it's a good proxy to school results. Second one, because we don't have national testing. It's very different in England and Czech Republic. We don't have any national testing except of exams, admission exams for upper secondary schools in 15 years. And 1/3 of pupils are not even taking this exam because they are not applying for these schools. So we don't have any direct measurement of educational outcomes and added value of schools so far. So we are discussing, should we develop this system? Is it useful for feedback for schools or measuring on the national level? And what are the other possible indicators you use? And I would stress that they should be, I think, simple, because they should be communicatable to schools and to influence the practice at school level.
And here I'll be probably interested in answers from all of you, but maybe, could you, Paul, maybe start, because you're testing your pupils quite frequently, so...
Yeah. In my first year of teaching, over 30 years ago, my head teacher said to me, "You don't make something any heavier by continually weighing it." And I wish you could have spoken to some people higher up than myself. There are a lot of tests in England. I think accountability is absolutely appropriate because large sums of public money are spent in schools. I really like what I hear from what's happening in Ireland, because that holding schools to account with no context when you have league tables can lead to all sorts of other issues and misconceptions about how good a school is and how good the work a school is doing. So I think it's a balance, and it's a look at the checks you're using. What is the purpose of them? And if the purpose is a stick to beat schools, then schools don't need. The schools work very, very hard. Everyone in schools work very, very hard. If it is a tool to measure where a pupil is at compared to a national standard, and whether going forward they may need additional support to close that gap, then that's a useful tool. So I think it's very much having that purpose in mind and sticking to it and then not bringing in. We brought in tests at age 11, and everybody saw the point of those. But since then now, we have tests at year 4, so that's age 8. Children are tested on whether they know their times tables. At age 7, at age 6, and age 5. So from one set of tests coming in, and we are held in English schools accountable for all of those outcomes. And if they're not at the national standard, then we're asked why. So they are used more as a stick than as a support. But having internal data, which is different, is very, very useful. So at Gladstone, we've purchased tests that are in the style of the national tests, but we don't publish those. We don't use those to tell children they're succeeding or failing. We use those to identify how successful the teaching has been and what does the curriculum need to look like over the next term. So we're not just following a curriculum that says, on week 1 you teach this regardless of whether they've understood everything from the previous term, because every area of learning is about building on prior learning. And if that prior learning isn't there, the lesson becomes pointless. So I'm not against testing, but testing with the right purpose and the right aim, not as a stick.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Martin. Martin, could you please follow?
Yeah, in Sweden you should say, I think, about 3 things, how to sort of... First of all, we have a national, all the national agency has agreed upon a specific criteria and framework for quality. What is quality in schools? So that's the national framework, which is fairly new, that everybody sort of relates to. And it's both quantitative and qualitative. So that's the basic framework, the systematic quality work on a national level. And then there are statistics, both locally and nationally, about student outcomes. And as you were saying, you look upon grades, but you have more and more national tests. So the school should have grading, that is, and it goes down and down and down. I don't know why, but it does. Well, I know why, but I don't see the... I shouldn't continue that route. And thirdly, there is local measures. They're basically more qualitative. There is formative assessment in the classroom all the time, having tests before starting and so on, so you can address what's really happening without really giving grades. And there is also qualitative measures, for example, when it comes to different development efforts. So, for example, Cooperation for Better Schools that I work with, we try to make a qualitative effort about the degree of improvement capacity in some criteria. So those are a few examples.
Thank you. And maybe Grainne, could you follow with your answer? How do you assess the effectiveness?
Yeah, so at the highest level, we introduced an action plan for education about 2016, and with that, we introduced a range of the high-level indicators, and we've been building. That you can find it online. It's an indicator set for Ireland or something very unusually titled like that. But basically, it's all of the data that we're sure we can stand over in terms of the school. So it has a whole range of, and we build that every year as we get better at the data. But at the highest level, we look at things like attendance. But we do that in retrospect because it's not done directly from the schools to the department. So we're trying to move to some system that would allow us actually real-time view. And there's been a couple of really sad, high-profile cases of children going missing within the system, and how the department can answer those questions, like where was that child, if they weren't enrolled, if they moved, those kind of things. It's really, so that attendance piece is really important, but also attendance from the point of view that we were talking about earlier on. Retention to leaving cert. So our school leaving age legally is 16. But to do Leaving Cert, you would usually be 18, 19. So that measuring that gap between, say, the DEYS school and the non-DEYS school, or the child at the level of the child from a socially challenged background, but particular cohorts. So we would have retention rates up in the 90s for most of the population, and down at 37% for travellers. So targeting in on those particular ones, when you say, you know, what indicators, they also have to be relevant then to the start point or the baseline from which you're measuring, obviously. We look at progression year to year. We look at where are children coming from into junior infants. So at 5, where are they coming from? So we have a 2-year early years programme. So how many children are actually coming in through that programme, and how are they doing then in junior and senior infants? And it's interesting to see the differences in that data. And then at the other end, where are they progressing to? So I would say, if I was setting it up, that longitudinal study that would actually begin to track children right from early years through their up to the Leaving Cert for us, but on into further education, higher education. What have their outcomes been? So setting that up early as you start to look at it, and then being able to track which of the, you know, if you came from a DEYS school, where have you ended up as opposed to a non-DEYS and things like that. We do the national tests as well, not quite as enthusiastically maybe as our UK counterparts, but we do have them at 2 and 3 different points in the school. But they're very much point-in-time testing. We find a huge pressure from parents starting on these tests. And it's so, you know, negative because it really is that point-in-time piece. It's only really should be internal. They're now really having, you know, celebrations and things around them. I mean, you know, it grows in Ireland, as I say, education does kind of attract. And then, yeah, so the longitudinal piece, I think it would be really important. We too have the quality framework piece that's then measured, you know, through the inspector's reports and that. And the one that's probably quite challenging is that well-being piece, and the social cohesion element, the interculturalism, that changing demographic that we have, and making sure that we've an indicator in there that somehow captures that. We also would look at subject choice as an interesting kind of proxy for some of the stuff. So are the children in a DEYS school or from a different background getting the option? For us, it's to do Irish. So if you don't do Irish, and if you don't get an honour in Irish and you're Leaving Cert, it blocks you for certain career paths. And we would find that, say, for some of these children, they'd never even been considered to go into the Irish class, you know, that's going to lead them on. They'll get an exemption, or they'll be put in the pass class, or, you know, so that expectation piece can be reflected by what's the profile looking like in terms of subject choice and the honours and pass in our system. And then obviously early school leaving. And the percentage of early school leaving coming from the different profiles of schools. So they'd be some of our big key ones. As we mentioned in Maeve's presentation earlier on, we're taking this apart and trying to put it back together now and look at what we can do and what we should be measuring. But I think that long-term piece is probably the piece we're missing.
Thank you. Yeah, Maarja.
Oops. No, it's okay. Thank you. Funnily, we are also developing our like a national quality framework. It is also new for us in general education. But what we do is that from the state level, we have annual level tests for children. And students, they don't get any grades for that. But this is, as we say, that we have comprehensive school system. So this gives feedback for the state, for the government, for the ministry, and for the schools, to make sure that everybody is on board. So, and some of them are mandatory, like mathematics, science, Estonian, and some are like voluntarily, like social sciences. So this is what we do extra.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything, Jan, or not?
It's very interesting, conflict you have here, like testing and measuring something and listing schools from best to worst, contra, feedback, honest feedback, and usefulness of this feedback. And we try to find the balance. For example, we try to compare the schools not to averages, national averages, or their surrounding schools, but to similar schools. So we have what are the schools which have also 20% of disadvantaged pupils doing in the absenteeism area? And are you above or below? Because I see a big, I have to say, it's very useful to motivate school principals. The same as when Paul was talking about the motivating of pupils to attend the schools. The principals are the same. They want to be better than other schools, of course. But nowadays in Czech Republic, they don't have a meaningful comparison because they are often compared to standard schools or, next schools. And they have different, student composition and different possibilities. So this is unfair comparison, which unmotivate the principals. But when we compare them amongst them, I think that it can be the challenge to top. So this is one way we approach it. And we are also, as Estonia is probably the historic, it's the same in all countries, the cycles of, you try something, find out it doesn't work, and you try something else. So we are in the middle of a curriculum reform, and the part of it is also the national-wide testing in 4 points from ages from 7 to 15. So we will have this low-stakes testing because it's not, part of the financing or the future educational path of a pupil. So we hope that we can use this as a feedback to schools. So we will see how it works out.
Martin.
Maybe I will comment on that. In Sweden, since long, we measure schools as related to a socioeconomic index. Mm-hmm. And it's not perfect, but it's give a rough estimate on, given your socioeconomical conditions, what are the sort of expected student outcome. However, so it works on a general level, and it works if you don't push it to, if you see it as a starting point for discussion rather than for actually measuring, because it's hard to really integrate all of it. Single schools can function much better and much worse than this general criteria tells you. So if you use it sort of on a literal rather than factual level, it works quite good, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, you may add.
You may want to look into the work of an organisation called Fisher Family Trust. So in the UK, we can, with our pupil data, we can look at schools that are statistically similar to ours. If they had those pupils, what would the top 50% of schools achieve as an outcome? What would the top 25% achieve, and so forth? So when we want to look at statistical neighbours, we've actually got a tool that does that for us.
Thank you. And I have a last question from this field, and I would like to address it to Maarja, because you are talking about how much data you use and how much maybe not use, but gather. But I would like to ask you if you use the data to improve practice beyond reporting, and how do you use them? And maybe even how many people do work at the Ministry of Education where you work with the data and with implementing them?
Thank you. I refer to different data. So from the state level, we do this annual well-being questionnaire. Okay. And the main target is to give feedback for the schools. Okay. So this is where the schools can get like a good quality data to do their development programs. But in Estonia, we have a central educational system, which is filled by schools. So there we have everything about the teachers, students, special needs, everything is in one system. And I thought, you know, it's just I don't know, some data, but it's actually at the ministry we have a whole department for people who are dealing with that data. And so everything, like when we work out some kind of new law, all the data basically comes from there. So this is like, we see that sometimes there are some, I don't know, errors as well, because the school level knowledge, how to fill the data is like uneven. Okay. So there can be like funny mistakes. Yep. That we even have like base school teachers with like 8th grade education and stuff. So, but there's like, you know, so like human errors. But this, we have central education data system, yes. Mm-hmm. And this is everything we always work with the analysts to when we are developing new laws or so. Okay.
So, for example, when you're making legal changes, you
yes.
first look at the data and to prove yourself.
Exactly, because like when my field is teacher policy, and I think this is one of the hardest fields at the ministry, because the lack of teachers worldwide is crazy. The amount lack of teachers is crazy. And every time, you know, when I need to argue with a minister, for example, you know, also who have done it, you know, it's not always so big fun. Sometimes easy, it depends on the minister, yeah. But always I have to get the data, facts. Otherwise, you know, there's going to be no law in the way, at least how we want it. So this data is actually a really good instrument for the public officials to prove their point.
That's great. Thank you. We should now move on to our last, probably more optimistic field of questions before we move on to the audience questions. So I would like each of you to answer one question, and that's what types of interventions have proven most effective in your experience? So if you could go one by one and maybe start with Grainne.
I think I will call out the homeschool community liaison post within the schools, because it's linking the school back to the family, it's getting that understanding, and then we can build a suite of supports around that. Mm-hmm. Is that enough?
Definitely, yeah. Thank you. Maarja.
Oh, it's a good question. And I get the sense that I'm starting to repeat myself. But I think, or maybe I'm just getting tired, you know, it has been a long day. For me, it's actually conscious implementation of the inclusive education. It's like, for me, it has been a game changer. And especially in Estonia, we have like so few people compared to your countries, you know, that we have to value every pupil. And by implementing inclusive education in a way it protects teachers, parents, students, this is actually this is what education should do. That it should like value every pupil. I don't know, was it the right answer, but it's just something where my head went.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Paul, could you follow with your answer?
In terms of type of intervention, I would say interventions that lead to changes of system and changes of culture, and therefore long-term sustainable. There's been some interventions that have been put into place in the UK that have come with a lot of funding, that was short-term funding, and were unsustainable as soon as the funding was removed. And you might as well not do those, because as soon as the funding stops, the intervention stops, and the child no longer has that support, and that progress goes. So, yeah, I would say stuff any interventions that will change culture and systems and have that long-term sustainability.
Okay, thank you. And Martin?
All the good points are already being made. One of the things actually strike out from my experience here is the very close partnership between local authority, the state, and the universities. That really differs from what I've experienced before, or it's new in the Swedish context within the school. As one of the top executives at the Ministry of Education was saying, hey, you mean that research can actually be of practical use? And I think it's related to we work together. It's not like we have the state just do this, or the researcher saying from my research agenda, but we work together with the state and the local municipalities, and that's hard really to grasp, but it's a new thing. I mean, in theory, it's been called Mode 2 research and things like that for a long time, but this close partnership, starting out with the very needs of the actual local kids and children and students and their students, starting out there and having a partnership, that I think is the future. At least that's my Swedish experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all your answers. And we can now move on for the last part. It's the questions from the audience. And so I would like to start with the first one. And it's about the position of school principals here in Czech Republic. And it states that here the role of the principal is kind of high in the hierarchy, and the possibility of change is mostly his responsibility. So the question is, if the principal isn't proactive and creative, things don't really work. And is it like that in your countries? So maybe Maarja, you could start.
I think I can. In Estonia, autonomy of the schools is a strength, but it's also a weakness, because we see that the leadership in schools is very different. And what we actually, on the government level, we're trying to change it. We have too many school leaders who say that we do those things because we have done those 30 years. You know, it's not enough anymore. And actually, we are now implementing a bill that we start a principals attestation program with local government. And this is also with Martin referred, we try to push more the cooperation, because in Estonia what we see that the cooperation between local government and schools is sometimes very poor. And so we start with the attestation of the school leaders, because by this we can also make sure that the school leader is knowing what he or she is doing. And this is not actually, we do it with a local level, but also a Estonian school principals association is involved, because this is their Zunft, so they can also be, it's the quality of the name as well. So it's not something you government officials come and you're going to push our asses and, it's go away. But we actually we take their Zunft to help us to offer a better quality in leading.
Thank you.
So this is something new we start next year.
Thank you. Paul, could you maybe share how strong the position of principal is in the UK or in England?
Being married to a principal, I should be careful what I say. I mean, ultimately, any organisation, school or otherwise, the example set by the leadership very much sets the tone for the whole organisation. So, whether we're talking schools or anywhere else, there is ultimate responsibility and accountability on principals in the UK. I would say the most effective and impactful principals are the ones that have devolved leadership throughout the school. So in my link meetings, I'm reporting and there's a level of trust between us that not once were any of the figures that I was putting forward questioned, because trust is absolutely key amongst leadership team, amongst all members of staff, and just with teachers as well. They have to trust that what the leadership team is saying is what they're going to do, and they're going to follow through. So it is, as I say, it is the ultimate accountability. And so there were times when I would have a link meeting, and at the end of the link meeting, the principal would say, "You've changed my mind there." And other times we'd have a link meeting, and he'd say, I've heard what you've got to say, but it's my head on the block. This is how I want you to do it. And I accept that, because he is the one accountable ultimately. And as long as you feel heard, I don't think there's an issue with that. The principals are accountable, very accountable.
Yeah.
So once a month, the principal has to meet with an education committee and talk through the progress against the school's development plan. So as I referred to, the leadership pipeline works at all levels in schools. So principals do have accountability to a body. But of course, it's the principal is the ultimate decider of things, because, as I say, they are the ones accountable. So, but it's good when you get on.
Thank you. Martin, would you like to follow?
In Sweden, the principals have a very, very strong position. My personal opinion is that we put too much accountability on the principals. We see them as superheroes. We want them to do everything and anything at once. So there is. And
Sorry, could you please put the microphone closer?
We see them as super persons, and that, in my mind, this is my personal opinion, relates to that there is a principal turnover that is higher than expected, and I think this has to do with that. So what we're doing now in Sweden, I think there are two trends. One trend is trying to strengthen and supporting the school management team, so it won't be just the principal, but there are several people. And the other thing is we have networks between principals locally, so they can support each other, because they are the ultimate decision maker. So these are two very strong trends in Sweden.
Thank you. Do you want to answer as well? You may if you want to, but I have another question for you. So if you want to answer the first one, you can. No? Okay, so I'll go on with the second one. We have a question that says, how much administrative demands are connected with the financial support for schools in your country? And there's also a statement, we are very bureaucratic here, which is very true. We all hate it, but at the same time, kind of love it because we use it so much. So maybe if you could answer your opinion or your experiences with the amount of administrative demands.
Yeah, it links back to the question before, actually, in fairness, because a lot of that goes to the principal.
Yeah.
In Ireland anyway, and they would tell us it does, because I suppose in our schools, one of the things, just listening to the others, the same kind of things, so everything goes up to the principal. When I mentioned the action plan for education, that came out of a huge push from principals across our system telling us to manage the pace and sequence of change better at a system level. So this constant, initiatives and more administration and more demand on them. We don't have, in fact, we're in the labour court at the moment with our secretaries and caretakers, if anyone's been following Ireland, because we don't have full-time secretaries in schools, we don't have full-time caretakers, they're employed by the individual schools, they're not on pensions, all those kind of things. So we've very little administrative support in the school. We do in the bigger schools have like a second leadership role that will be an administrative role, but that's in very large schools. I mentioned that we have a huge percentage of small schools with the under 4 teachers, so they're teaching principals. So they're doing all of the administration on top of their teaching. They may have a half-day kind of allocation or something like that. Yeah. So, yes, the burden is high. I'm not sure in terms of how we manage it or get better at it, but we, under our reform programme at government level, we have introduced a number of shared services. I don't know, have you the same here? So that instead of every school running their own payroll and things like that, that's run now centrally, you have that as well. So there's a move towards the centralisation of shared services for finance, for HR, for payroll, which should take some of the burden from the schools, but they'd tell us maybe it doesn't so much. And then, yeah, the reporting piece obviously is heavy going. And because our data systems are poor, and again, it's about building the right IT system and data system to support what we're trying to do, we do this thing of asking for the same information. Yeah, and we're not very popular for that.
Jan, do you want to add something?
This is, I think, universal experience, and this was the weak point from our piloting program, because it was very administrative heavy, because we collected all of the data. We wanted to use this opportunity, and also we had to collect the data about financing, because we had to report this financing to European Commission. So it was doubly so very, and we didn't know all the requirements beforehand. So we additionally required additional information. So it was very unfortunate for us also. And I admired all the principals and secretaries at schools which had to deal with it. But I think that some amount of paperwork is necessary, because if you ask a teacher what is a bureaucratic burden for him, they very often mention those things you would think are pedagogical. For example, I have to report, or I have to assess disability of a child. It's a paperwork. I have form for it and I have to write it. But is it a paperwork, or is it a bureaucratic burden, or is it something useful for pedagogical assessment? So it's not very clear line, and some paperwork is necessary, and some collection of data, of course, is necessary. But as you said, we should eliminate the double and triple asking, and we should share the information with local governments. This is area for improvement for us, because very often the local governments, which are the founders of schools, are collecting independently the same data as the Ministry of Education. So I hope we will, thanks to technological advancement, improve this and lower the burden. But I think that, and it's especially problematic with smaller schools, of course, when principal also teaches. But the last thing is that my experience is that great principals are good in delegating, and they are great principals because they are not in their schools and their school is working fine. So this is how you find out that he's a good manager. So we try to, support principals in delegating and managing the whole schools. And some of you mentioned that there are two ways. You distribute the burden between more people in school, and you share the burden with the network of other principals. So we are going in both directions. It's the other part of my department is dealing with further education of pedagogical staff. So we are doing that broadly, not in the context of inclusive education.
Thank you. Now, Martin, I have a question addressed directly to you, and someone would like to ask you, what is the current education reform in Sweden aiming at? What will change regarding teaching and curriculum? And are there any lessons learned that could maybe help us here?
Could you repeat that question? I missed the first part.
Okay, what is the current education reform in Sweden aiming at? And what will change regarding teaching and curriculum?
If I I understand it correctly, it's about trends in Sweden. I don't really hear what you're asking in the beginning. That's my English is too bad, I'm sorry. But it's about trends, yeah? What's the question about?
The education.
The overall aim of the reform.
Yes, sorry.
There are the overall aim. I think we have had a system for quite a long time with equal opportunities, inclusion, and so on. And that's been around for a while, and I think most people agree on it's not easy, but it ought to be there. One of the trends and the aims now is trying to focus more on the individual, strengthening the individual. So there is a policy decision about career models for teachers. And I think it's the basic starting point for that is you want to strengthen the teacher profession in Sweden. Because, teaching profession is, according to most sociologists, not even a profession. It's not strong enough. So having a career model, but that's actually true. I met a lot of sociologists saying, are you really a profession? So this is part of strengthening the profession. It's like, saying bad words in the church or the temple or something, but sociologists actually say that. So this is about strengthening the salaries, the status, the level of teachers. So that's a very strong, it's been decided upon, however, not yet fully implemented. But career models for teachers, that's the future.
Thank you. Jan,
can I have a follow-up question for Maarja especially, because it was very interesting. You were asked after your presentation about the Finland and what you learned from the Finnish reforms and their results in PISA, and you said that you are more conservative and curriculum focused. And my question is, because we are in the middle of curricular reform in Czech Republic, and we are not very concrete in our expectations and descriptive curriculum. And is it a challenge for disadvantaged pupils, more so than majority of pupils, to step from the descriptive curricula? We expect that you will do, I don't know, multiplication by the age of 8, and you do this at the age, and we are not doing that. We are leaving it up to school. And is it dangerous, especially towards the disadvantaged pupils?
Actually, we took the same direction. We don't know, it's too soon to say. We implemented it last year. But actually, we also, like from the national curriculum, we basically took out all the specific learning outcomes. Like, for example, I used to be a history teacher. So in previous times, you had to know, for example, who was Napoleon. But now it's written that has to know historical person. So, because in Estonia, we also have this strong belief and educational mantra nowadays that we also have to support as much as possible as we can students' like interests. And so, and the teacher, autonomous teacher, professional, should know the best what's his or her students' interest. And now it's just also like how, and we also actually what we did, that the learning outcomes school can decide, but we also stepped really big step towards general competencies. Basically, it's equalized now, the knowledge and also the general competencies. And in our curriculum, there are 8, like digital competence, social, communication, culture and value, entrepreneurship, etc. So, and we put those together. And now the tricky part is, because we also have 2 times in the general education state exams, after 9th grade, after 12th grade. So also like with this reform, we also have to like have a different approach for the state exams. But this we did, too soon to say, but this is more like following the individual learning path for every student.
Thank you. Anything more, Jan? Or it's
just, from the other participants, do you have any differences when you approach disadvantaged pupils in terms of curricula? For example, the stress on vocabulary acquirement, or enlarging vocabulary, for example, or because there are differences, and they may benefit more from some strict curricula or at the early age, for example, because they have some disadvantage from the family. For example, they don't have so large vocabulary. So are there any specific intervention in this sense in any of your countries?
Can I add? This is something we emphasize a lot, but not on a curriculum level. In Estonian as well, like every teacher has to differentialize the learning materials. This is by default, but this is not something we emphasize on a curriculum level.
I think maybe in Ireland it's reflected through our assessment as opposed to the curriculum, because we would be the same as Estonia there. And at Leaving Cert level, there are 3 different pathways that a person can take. So there's what we call the standard exam. That's the big one that everyone has a heart attack around June. And then there is a Leaving Cert Applied, which is much more practical in its makeup and would often be used in schools, particularly the DEYS schools. And then there's a Leaving Cert vocational program, which is small bite-sized pieces in that. But you probably know too that we're in the middle of a huge reform on senior cycle. It's been coming for about 40 years, but it's now upon us. And that's trying to move away from that big central exam in June. But so more it's reflected in the assessment pathways than I think the curriculum itself, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. We have time for one last answer. So, Paul, if you could close.
Just from a practical day-to-day level, what we're very aware of is our pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds have a lack of what we term in the UK a cultural capital. So the experiences that they bring to their learning can be much narrower than the experience of their peers in the class. So being aware when teachers are teaching a subject that there may be more visuals needed, there may be a visit needed to actually experience. Many of our children have never been in a wood. So they have no concept of what a group of trees looks like. Never been to the seaside, never seen running water. So when that learning isn't there, those experiences aren't there, never been to a museum. So we've put together a passport of experiences that every child at Gladstone will have before they leave, to try and build up that cultural capital. But it has to be thought through by the teachers before they teach each unit. What if the child's never experienced that? Will they be able to access the learning? How do you adjust at the start?
Thank you. Okay, that's it for the panel discussion. Thank you so much for participating and joining us here, flying all the way from the countries that you come from. And so thank you. I would like to ask for a round of applause for all of our speakers.